about what actually provoked me into taking an even more detailed look at what actually goes on in textile crafts. So by the time I set up Common Threads, this brand new discipline, started by Richard Skemp really, Psychology of Learning Maths, the new discipline of maths education, it was pretty well established, with the usual round of conferences and all that stuff. And within it there was a subset of ethno-mathematics, which you could roughly define as mathematics done by people who haven't been put through the standard Western version of Newton and all that. At one maths education conference with an ethno-math subset in it, I had taken this rug that I had recently bought in Turkey on one of my dome hunting expeditions. And unfortunately, the rug itself was stolen from my office. Unfortunately, somewhere, it might even be archived, there's a colour reproduction of this. But this is a kilim, it's a flat weave, and it's not like a tufted weave where you weave straight across and put not little tufts on all the way across. In these, you can work on different colours at the time. Where you come, if say you're working on that one, and you come to the end of that bit, and then you go back again, and then you go back again until you've used up that little colour. So if you actually hold these things up to the light, you see little slits where the colours change. They're not really designed to be walked on. They're designed for covering things with and hanging on the wall. But if you were a secondary maths teacher and you had been doing some work on symmetry, and you said to your kids, okay, take some isosceles triangles and see if you can make me a nice design using various symmetries we've been talking about, and one of the students came up with that, you might actually be quite pleased. It is actually just one of the motifs from this carpet. Just one of them. So you go back and look at this carpet again, and this is where I get all my OHPs from my butt. And you look at the whole thing, and you think the weaver who made this she isn't actually working through a drawing. As she works on one part of the carpet, she has in her mind's eye a pretty clear idea of what the whole finished article is going to look like. She's almost certainly illiterate, but that doesn't mean very much at all. It's just a skill you haven't got, it doesn't mean you're stupid. She's drawing from a collection of skills in her head that she has learnt at Mother's Knee, which is a very, very under-researched learning resource. And in the part of the world where they make these, they start them young. They really do. So, she's not working on paper. You can't rub out a bit that you don't like and try it again. You can't cut it off here and stick it on somewhere else. You can't take out a motif and turn it round. You don't make mistakes, because mistakes are extremely expensive to make, because every single part of the raw material of your rug is made by the hands of someone in your family. The sheep are reared and sheared over months and months of hard work. The wool is then washed, carded, spun, dyed and all that, and quite often you've made the dyes yourself, but that's changing now. Any unpicking of the mistake weakens the threads you've so laboriously made, which is why you don't make mistakes. The loom is almost certainly made by hand as well, so that it could be taken down and put up somewhere else as the family changes pastures. The warp threads are the strong ones that go that way. There are quite specific number onto which you work out where you're going to put your symmetries. And you can't do that without a certain amount of calculation. You just can't do it. So, there is in fact a very large literature on these carpets. It's mostly in German and Turkish, which makes it pretty inaccessible to me. But those who really studied them have likened the skill of making one of these to the skill of conducting a symphony orchestra without a score. And I think that's just about right. So, when I waved this carpet around at an ethno-math session at a maths education conference, and Alan Bishop, who I will name, said to me, but she's not thinking mathematically. All I could think of by way of a polite response was to say, well, what did she say she was thinking when you asked her? And I'm very happy to add that after a certain amount of conversation, Alan recanted a bit, and he then told me a wonderful story about when he was back in Melbourne as Professor of Maths Education, and he had a student doing a PhD who was trying to get inside the head of a native Australian tracker. And he'd done the first part of the PhD, he'd done the literature search, he'd done the essay and all the rest of it, and he was out in the trackless wastes with this tracker, trying to get inside the visuospatial skills of this tracker, and he was getting absolutely nowhere. So he said to the tracker, somewhat in desperation, okay, tell me what you do when you get lost. And the tracker said, oh, I just go home. The student was about as far removed from the visuospatial ability of this tracker as Alan was from the weaver of this carpet when he said that she's not thinking mathematically. Now you can go off into gender if you wish. I'm not going to, because let's talk about knitting. Is there anything, would you like a little break now? Say anything or complain about anything I've said up to now, because that really is the history of how it all began.
No, I put it into context with the bridges and
that go in to make up the whole sweater. And each one of these is worked out on a definite group of a definite number. And you can either work out how you're going to fit them all in, and you see people all over Donegal doing this without, you know, they sometimes get Vandy to start it off for them. If you actually try and write down, this is a knitting pattern. In America it's called a recipe. And it's a rather a phony errand, as anyone I could find. And if you look inside it, it tells you what to do. You get 2 pages of absolutely dreadful algebra. The thing is, this is a description of what the knitter does while she does it. This has nothing to do with the way the knitter thinks. Because if you're making one of these things, all you actually need is the first few rows. And when I was doing this, I would sort of shut myself up somewhere in the house and nobody was interrupting me until I got the first 2 or 3 rows set. And then your thinking changes, and you start thinking visually, and you follow the pattern. So what you actually do not want is that. This was actually a task I was going to set you at the end. And the similar thing...
Sweaters, that, doesn't it?
Sorry?
People do produce sweaters from those.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It was a present. They were lovely. This is the Shetland Fair Isle Knitwear Association. And they said to me that they would be delighted to give me this for the exhibition. They said, choose one that you would like yourself so that you can wear it afterwards, because these things last forever. And here it is. And it kept me alive this winter because they are just so warm. Now, one of the interesting things about making these things is the number 7 turns out to be really quite significant. This is, I'm not being mystical here. This is more to do with gravity. If you can use any colours you like to make one of these things, but each colour, of course, comes attached to a ball of wool, and if you use them all at once, you just end up with a sort of cat's cradle mess on the floor. So in any one row, you tend to use just 2 colours, and you're knitting along with one colour, and the other colour you're not using is hanging down behind. And when you change colours, you pull up the one from behind, start knitting with that one, and the other one falls down behind. Now, if you, with this particular yarn, thinness, and particular needles that they usually work on, if you knit more than 7 stitches, then the loop that hangs down behind hangs down too much. And 2 things happen. It catches in your fingers when you put it on, but it also breaks this beautiful insulating layer that makes these sweaters so wrong. So that is why 7 is actually so important. And of course, as an entrance into the cabbage pack, you start getting the kids on designing period designs, the ones called period. You know, you're off. You're into the 7 strip patterns and all sorts of things. There's another thing I wanted to say about knitting patterns is, of course, that 2 experienced knitters communicating with each other or reminding themselves write it down in a rather different way. This is my grandmother's reminder to herself. This is 1950, knitting socks for my brother and my cousin. That is all she needed. And when I got engaged, my future mother-in-law sort of learned how to knit, which delighted her, because then she could stop knitting socks for her little boy, and I could do it instead. And she had all the yarn and all the needles, and she handed them over to me, and that was all the information she gave me as to how to knit John's socks. Because we had met each other halfway. And talking about socks, I actually must show you my sock collection, because it is wonderful. The thing about socks is that you are nagging a right angle bend. And okay, it's a flexible right angle bend. But if it was a pipe in a garden or something you wanted to stop freezing over, any form of lagging is going to actually bunch up inside the angle and make a hot spot when it's going to stretch out too much. The ideal solution is a domestic sock. And there are lots of things you can do. I mean, this is a cheap sock. This is just a tube, but it's a spiral. It makes quite a good bed sock. There's no attempt there to sort of turn the corner. This is a factory sock, and these are made on a machine that I can really describe as a sort of mechanical, huge mechanical cow's udder. It has all these potential socks hanging down, and it's programmed to put a right angle bend in. And I bought this one in the market because it shows you where the right angle bend is. So you set the machine on, and it makes a right angle bend. And then it starts to make another right angle bend, and you say stop, and take it off the machine, and send it off to another factory where it's sewn together like crossways, instead of that way. And it does make you wonder what would happen if you, well, obviously what would happen if you just left it on, because you get luggage. Went on forever. Anyway, for the exhibition,